Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mid-Tier Thoughts. This is episode 6. We got a little something special for you today. Me and Mike are actually both in the same location.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear him, but
Oh
he's
yeah, no. I'm sure they can hear me fine. I
yeah,
was on the recording.
absolutely. So we're together. Decided to meet up. I'm over on the coast doing some stuff, and decided I'd stop by and we'd do this episode together in person.
Yeah, we're more than together in person.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, we're together.
Oh, spicy. Speaking of spicy, so this episode's going to get kind of spicy. For some, I would imagine a lot of our listeners probably agree to a certain extent with what we're about to talk about. Some of you might get a little pissed off. That's kind of the point. So we're just going to roll the dice and see what happens. So today's episode, we're focusing a lot on upcoming gun control laws, both at the Washington state level where we're at, as well as at the national level, but kind of just talking too about like some of the general issues surrounding this with the gun community, as well as some of the general apathy that people in the gun community have. So I guess kind of my thing starting off is just in a general broad aspect, and I know Mike and I have both experienced this working at a gun shop. There are a lot of gun owners out there that take their rights for granted.
Or lack of better words, are just clueless. They just don't know anything that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like they're clueless. They don't know what's going on. They're not paying attention to it. Like I'm right there with people with not watching the news all the time or keeping up on things. Like I know the world sucks. I don't have to tune in every day at 5 to figure that out. But it's good to know, especially like with something like firearms and the legality surrounding them, that you know what's going on. Like you know what is happening around you. And I remember in Washington State, we had a piece of legislation go through. It was called 1639, and it raised the age of purchase for a semi-automatic rifle to 21. It made it harder to get, longer background check, and everything like that, right? And people would come in, like the law was passed in like January some in time frame, and it went into effect in July, and people were coming in well after July, completely surprised. Like, what do you mean I can't leave same day with a gun? Or what do you mean I can't buy one at 21 anymore? People were just blown away. They had no idea. And it's like, we've been warning people and telling people and putting out advertisements and everything. And like, we were a well-known shop. We've been putting out information on this for months, like for like almost a year beforehand, as we found out that this was even a possibility, and just completely ignorant.
Yeah, I mean, how many people, like, when the magazine ban was coming through in Washington, I know a lot of people were saying, didn't know anything was going on. They had no idea what was happening. We were putting it out there like crazy, just sending it to every single person we possibly could, advertising on the windows, putting up flyers, whatever it was. And daily, people would come in and have no idea what's going on, all the way up to the day of the vote. And after it passed, people still didn't know what was happening. And they just people just are in their little bubble, and they think that they're untouchable, and they think that they can kind of buy and do whatever they want because of the state's rules or the place they live. Because we lived in a smaller part of Washington where guns are more popular comparatively to over here. So over here, people are pushing for it. Over there, nobody wanted it, but nobody really cared. Nobody wanted to get into politics. Nobody wanted to have that hard talk. And then I can't even tell you how many people would be like, oh, it'll never pass. It'll never happen. They always try to do this, and it never goes through. Until it did.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to a general level of complacency that people have, and that's what I mean. Like by taking it for granted, is that people are just willing to, people will be like, "Oh, you can take my gun from my cold dead hands," but they're not even willing to stay informed enough to do anything about it. Like they're not getting involved legislatively. They're not supporting like people who are. They're not. They have just completely unaware of what is going on or what the rules are. And so when these things get passed, they're unoblivious or worse. How many people did we have come through and tell us that they voted for 1639 because it made its way to the initiative ballot, and no one had any idea what they were voting for because they called it like the Safe Schools Act or something, and people are like, oh, I voted for that, and then it's like, oh, well, you're a retard.
Yeah, I mean, they put it under false pretenses almost. They were like, hey, this is do you not like safe schools? And
right.
You're like, of course I want safe schools. I have fucking kids. Like, I want safe schools. Oh yeah, we just have to ban AR-15s or not ban AR-15s. They'll put it under something else. Like, we have to incorporate background checks. more lengthy ones. And the people are like, oh, okay, I get the understanding of it, but what they don't read is the fine print of it, saying, hey, to own this gun, not only are you going to have to wait for it, but we're also going to incorporate this law, this law, this law. We're going to need this, and we're going to need your firstborn's blood, whatever it may be, to pass that background check, you know? Even though we've had background checks this entire time. The entirety of gun ownership, almost.
Yeah, I think a big thing, too, that's a big issue is that, people, they want everyone else to do their work for them. They want someone else to take that fight. They want someone else to go do something about it. They're just going to sit there and hope that someone somewhere is going to make that fight for them. And, let this be a lesson to other states out there. Washington is a very interesting state in that we have like 30-ish counties, and there's about 5 counties on the coast that on the kind of the fishhook looking part of Washington that vote blue. The rest of the state's pretty red, with 1 or 2 purple counties intermixed where the college towns are. The big thing about that, though, is there's about 7 million people in Washington, but in the Seattle metro area, it's more than half of them. So we're in a state very much like California, Portland, or Oregon with Portland, and in the major cities in California, and a lot of people feel this in other states where you have a big city that's a big metropolitan area like the capital area, and a bunch of rural. That's generally the big cities are blue and everywhere else is red. And when it comes to the vote, I know that sometimes there's a lot of feelings of like, well, my vote doesn't matter. They always outnumber us anyway. Well, when this 1639 thing went through a few years ago, our previous boss was really big into politics, very involved in the county, and found out the numbers on when it went to a ballot issue, and we had some of the lowest voter turnout ever. People just thought, no, that'll never happen, or, oh, that won't happen here. Well, the people who want to take your guns away, they vote, and they are very heavily involved in politics. They know what's going on because they're the ones pushing for it. And for those out there, this is a personal pet peeve of mine, who you think you're more noble because you're abstaining from a political system. You're like, I'm not going to play their game. I'm not going to vote. My vote doesn't matter. You can think that, but that also lets them win in a certain sense that like they don't have to cheat if you just don't vote, if you just don't get out there and do anything about it, right? Like you're letting people like who want to take rights away from you be the ones in charge. And I totally understand the argument of like, well, screw the government. I'm going to keep my guns. They can outlaw them all day long. I'm not turning them in. I totally get that. But why even let it get to that point?
Yeah.
Like, why not make that fight when it's just a court battle, right? When you can get lawyers, and I don't mean like you personally get lawyers, but supporting the organizations who are fighting for it to where you never have to worry about that, because that's very short-sighted thinking. That's very, you're not thinking about your kids, your grandchildren. You're basically saying, I'm going to get to enjoy these freedoms by, whatever means necessary. But my children, well, they can live in slavery because they're not going to get to enjoy the freedoms I have. And I look at it like when I have children, right? And I want them to be able to enjoy the same things I enjoy. I want them to have more freedoms than I do. And I don't want to be sitting there in a rocking chair when I'm 80 looking at my grandson who doesn't know what, an AR-15 is because they've been banned forever or whatever, right? And say, and have him be like, Grandpa, what did you do to preserve our firearms rights? And go, oh, I didn't vote. I don't play the game. You know what I mean? Like,
dude, and then for the people, it just drove me up a wall whenever I would be like, hey, man, these are our rights. They're coming for our rights. They're going to come take them. And people are like, well, Idaho's not that far, so I'm just going to go buy my magazines in Idaho. And that's the most fucking ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my entire life. You're going to bootleg magazines, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, that we have to go across the border, buy them illegally, and then try to smuggle them back into our state. Like it's something that's pretending to like firearms, or it's just super deadly and that it's going to kill everybody around us. And that it almost makes you feel like a moonshiner. Like what's going on here?
Exactly. It's so dumb that like we have to, that is the mentality of someone to be like, oh, well, if I want to go buy magazines, I have to cross a border and import them. Like, like you're Smokey and the Bandit with magazines. You know?
it's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Dude.
Yeah, it's like, why ever let it get to that point? And the thing about that too, I think this brings up another point I kind of wanted to touch on here. There's this idea that we can keep running from this fight to freer states, which to a certain extent you can. But I've said for a long time, the anti-gun crowd, they know that no matter how hard they try, like just the states, I mean the federal legislature system is so diverse as far as pro-gun and anti-gun that they will never be able, hopefully anyway, at a federal level to pass assault weapons bans nowadays, right? But they don't have to at a federal level. If they can one by one take down every state,
it's picking. It's just like picking at the paint. Like
exactly,
we're not coming for your guns. We just say you can't order barrels online anymore.
You know, a big thing in the gun community this year was, or into last year, early this year, was Oregon with the laws that they passed that got passed around everywhere. And it was talking about, like you basically have to sacrifice your child to maybe get permission to possibly get a license that you might need to have to maybe buy a gun, right? Mm-hmm. And it's sad that it got to that point, but the thing is, it's like, okay, cool. Well, they've conquered Oregon now. They don't need to spend any more money in Oregon, because even if Oregon pours its heart and soul into legislation to fight this, it's going to take years, if not decades. Look at the California mag ban. How many years, or I think, was it like almost 20 years or something for it to make it through the Supreme Court, and they're still enforcing it, even though Supreme Court's already said no, you can't do that.
It's unjust. Yeah.
20 years, and they're still fighting it, right? Well, they took out Oregon. They cucked Washington with mags. They're trying to push an assault weapons ban. Well, if you're in Idaho or Nevada or Montana or the Dakotas or Wyoming,
this will never happen to us.
Yeah, exactly. If you're somewhere where you think you're safe, ask yourself this: how many Californians or like liberal state people moved out of their state to come to yours?
Look at Colorado.
Exactly. In the Coeur d'Alene, Idaho area, northern Idaho, staunch conservative area, very pro-gun, but there's been a lot of people from Seattle and a lot of people from California coming up there because the land was cheap and they could get out of where they were from, and they brought their politics with them, and they brought their money with them, and they're putting their money behind anti-gun people. Yep. And all I'm saying is, if you look at the amount of money that's being put into states to take away guns, it's turn on and turn off, right? Once they've taken them, they know that they don't have to pour money back in there to keep them, out of your hands. So what if it goes to court? So what if they lose? They don't care. They know it's going to be 20 years, right? And you're going to be used to it by then. So now they plan on the next 3 states. So, they've got the West Coast, they've got the East Coast. Now they're coming for Middle America. And they're just going to one by one slowly start walking it in until you're left with nothing.
And this is how they present it too, which makes it so fucking horrible to me. It just disgusts me all the way down to my core. Is that they're like, okay, we'll give you an ultimatum here: either no more AR-15s or 10-round mags. And then you're like, oh, of course. Well, I want to keep my AR-15. I guess I'll take the 10-round mags. But what you didn't realize, what you just agreed in on, is like, okay, you can take my rights, but you didn't have to agree on either of those at all. You did not have to say yes, but you're choosing to say yes.
I think another good example of that too is you'll see some of these gun bills. We see it a lot in on the congressional side of things, and that's when we all get scared. Is they'll push through some kind of crazy gun bill that does everything, all the things at once. Purchase permits. It'll do licensing. It'll do. It'll take care of concealed carry. It'll get rid of concealed carry. It'll make it harder to purchase, raise the age, eliminate certain types of firearms. And it's like this one gun apocalypse bill. Well, they do this because then when it goes into the yelling match of left versus right, pro-gun, anti-gun, whatever, they can go, okay, fine, we'll compromise with you. Instead of taking everything you have, we'll only take 1 or 2 things. And then the next time they present a bill, they don't have to put those things in it. They go for the next ones. And then they compromise by only getting 1 or 2 things going through. And it's like, hey, I don't have to cut off both your arms and your legs. Just pick one limb you can live without, right? That's basically what they're doing. And then the next time they come back, okay, pick a different body part. I'm not going to take all of them. Well, eventually you keep playing this game, you don't got body parts no more. You're just a nugget.
You're California. You're rocking no pistol grip. Everything has to be extended upon 16 inches. Everything is 10 round mags, 5 round mags. I think they're doing 10 round mags, but they're trying to get it down to 5 round mags.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just on and on and on and on.
And the thing is, we're never going to get to a point to where the anti-gun crowd is going to say, okay, we've taken enough. We're good. We're not going to come after your guns anymore. There's always going to be another goalpost. There's always going to be something else they're going to come after. And I'm a big advocate that, and I've been guilty in the past just as much as everybody else of being, seeing a state going through this and being like, well, that's what you get for living in, California. But I'm wrong in thinking that. And the reason that is every state gun issue should be treated as a national issue.
If they're coming for your rights.
By the entire gun community. Exactly. Because they're coming for your rights. Just because you don't live there doesn't mean they're not coming for your rights. They are attacking your Second Amendment right to where you cannot exercise it in a state of the very country you live in. How is that any different than a foreign power coming in and saying, nope, this is the rule now? That's the way I look at it anyway.
It's so crazy, dude, because you also, I don't know if you guys followed the news or not, but there was just another shooting in California with multiple dead and a lot injured, and it's all these states where all the gun laws are cucked, and I lived in California for a while I was stationed down there, and I worked at a gun shop down there as well, and the amount of hoops that you'd have to hop through just to purchase like a 38 special, just an old lever gun, is ridiculous. It's like, I swear, it's like you're purchasing weapons of mass destruction. You're buying an NFA item, basically.
Dude, I've seen like some of the process that's involved. I didn't live in California, but I'm talking to you, talking to other people. I mean, like I've signed less paperwork buying a car.
Yeah.
Buying a house is easier than buying a gun in California. And that's the thing is this we all know. People who don't know what they're talking about write these laws.
Yeah. Oh, but before I lose my train of thought on that, but they just had another mass shooting, and it's just, what are these laws doing for you? What are these laws helping you with at any point? Because now I can't own a gun, walk around in public, because I can't even own a concealed pistol license in the state of California. But this maniac can still get a gun, and this maniac can still shoot up a park and kill all these people. And what could I have done?
Right. It's like, okay, you pass all these laws to come after law-abiding people, to outlaw the things they already have, and then you go, oh, well, we will be gracious enough to let you keep what you have, but everybody else, though, you can't get anymore. And it's like, okay, so I'm allowed to enjoy my freedom, but my children aren't. I just have to subject them to living freedomless. And imagine if this was any other right that we have as Americans. Imagine if the state of California told people, and who knows with California, maybe they did or they are, but any state that you live in said, you know what, we're going to limit your free speech abilities only between the hours of 8 to 5, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. You're only allowed to have free speech during those hours. And any time after that, well, you could go to jail.
I mean,
but you can have your rights, but your children, though, they can't.
Imagine the uproar there would be if, like, the amount of drunk drivers, which is ridiculous. Drunk drivers kill more people a year than any firearm-related incident at all. So imagine if they just came out and like, hey, in order to get your license, in order to drive, you're gonna have to pass this essay. You're gonna have to do this. You're gonna have to do that. Which they just basically cuck you, and they're like, hey, you can't drive above 10 miles per hour. If you have a single drink other than water, you're not allowed to drive anymore. People would be losing their fucking minds. People would be all in the streets. They'd be like, this is ridiculous. Why do I have to do this? And, no one cares about your guns, though. And, it's going to protect your life one day.
Yeah, and just to give you guys kind of an idea of what we're facing here in Washington State. So in Washington State, our legislative cycle's gone into effect early January, and there's some major anti-gun bills that are being pushed through. So generally in Washington State, you can almost guarantee the outcome of the legislature by the makeup of the legislature. And the left has the numbers to take the rights away if they choose to, just by pure numbers. If every Democrat votes according to the policy, it will go through. And so we're fighting this thing tooth and nail. But just to give you guys an idea of some of the things they're proposing. So the first one is they are trying to do an assault weapons ban. Now, I hate using the term assault weapon, but because of the way it's being used, you almost have to, just because you got it so people know what you're talking about, right? So they're trying to ban every semi-automatic long arm. Shotgun, rifle, does not matter. There's a grandfather clause, so you can keep what you have, but it dies with you. Can't give it to your kids, can't let anyone else use it, and it also limits the places in which you can use it, which is hunting, a licensed firing range, and in your own home, right? So your rights are now limited to what you can own and where you can use it. And you can't even give it to, you can't pass them down at all. So that's one thing. Another one is that they want, in the state of Washington, to remove the protection, the legal protection for Washington state FFLs, so gun shops, and they want to be able to hold them liable for damages caused by the firearms if they sell them to somebody who commits a crime with them. And, my big thing on this, you hear a lot on the news, are like, oh, this crazy person that went and shot people, he got a gun. Well, when you come into the gun shop, if I don't know you're crazy, right? You come in, you act totally normal, totally fine. Just, hey, man, what's up? You fill the paperwork out. I don't get any weird, creepy vibes. How the hell do I know what you're doing with it? I don't know that you're a maniac. There's no legal way. There's no background. I mean, there's background checks and there's mental health checks. Washington State has those. But there's no way to, for me to know, and that's the thing is, if you're a crazy person, but you've never gone to the doctor to be diagnosed as a crazy person, nobody knows you're a crazy person. There's nothing to prevent that.
This is where I have beef with that, too, is that, we want to talk a statistic game here. Most of those times, almost every single time you talk about one of those mass shooters, anything like that, they didn't buy the gun. Mm-hmm. They weren't the legal person that purchased the gun. They got the gun in illegal manners. I mean, just that school shooting that happened a while back, he killed his mom.
The Uvalde guy?
Yeah. Killed his fucking mom and stole the gun. It's not... It's dumb people handling their guns in wrong ways and somehow getting the firearm.
Well, or even this, let's say the guy did buy the gun. Well, I've bought guns years ago. If I never buy a gun again, it's like I bought guns way in the past. If someday, something happens to somebody and they snap, but they bought a gun 7 years ago, well, 7 years ago, they were perfectly normal. Yeah. And then when just one day they snap and they go do something stupid and crazy, well, the thing about that is that the headline's going to read, oh, local gun shop sold this guy his gun. But they're not going to tell you that they sold it to him, almost a decade ago. It's, who knows what's happened in that time frame in between that. You don't know.
But if you want to talk statistically, that didn't happen.
Yeah, 100%. A lot of the times they're illegal. They're guns that are stolen. Or illegally purchased. There's most of these crimes being committed. It's not like the guy. I mean, now granted there are exceptions, but a lot of these times they're getting the guns from somewhere else. They're not just going down to the local sportsman's warehouse, picking it up, and then leaving 10 minutes later to go do that. A majority of the time, and you can't legislate all of this away. And the thing to remember too, as I'm sure a fact we're all really aware of, there are 120 firearms per 100 citizens. So there's 1.2 guns for every one person. So there's more guns than people in the United States. And those are guns that we know of. That's since serial numbers became legalized, right? I mean, became enforced by law. And so there was a long time before that where sometimes they weren't, or a serial number was put on a gun for tracking purposes or manufacturing purposes, things like that. But you get just sometimes you find some really old firearms. I've seen some Stevens brand double barrel, bird guns from the early 1900s. There's no serial number on them. They weren't legally required at the time, right? You could go to Sears and pick up a washing machine and a shotgun on the same day. That was normal. And
that's not even counting when 3D printing was huge.
Oh, 3D printing? Well, it's still huge, Yeah. 3D printing, and that's something that's an interesting thing to talk about too, because you look at other countries, they're very heavily regulated. I just saw a thing that, today, actually, in Taiwan, there was a guy and they got him, and he had like 6 or 7 different the FGC9s, which stands for F gun control. It's by a German dude who created a 3D printing profile where you can 3D print all of the components for the firearm. I don't think the barrel is. It might be.
It's everything except for the chamber and barrel.
So yeah, the chamber and barrel you got to machine yourself, but everything
you
else.
Buy those online.
Oh, okay, there you go.
You bought them online and shipped them to your house, but they're not firearms or firearm related. You're just buying a metal tube and a metal jig, and they were just buying them and 3D printing everything else.
Yeah, and there was that, and there was another guy in the UK, guns not allowed, period, right? Mm-hmm. He was buying demilitarized firearms, which generally means they one of the ones they talked about is he had a Luger that had a pin driven through the barrel, right? You couldn't see it from the outside, just internally. Well, he was going through there and modifying these enough in a way, and then making his own firing mechanisms, and going out and making working firearms.
Oh, that one dude in Africa made an AK out of a Honda Civic.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's I know there's a thread on like an AK forum one time where a guy literally made an AK receiver out of a shovel. Like he took a garden shovel and made an AK out of it because he wanted to prove that he could. And, it was a real crap gun, but it worked. And we've all seen the whole, put a nail in a pipe, squeeze it together. We've all seen this before. We've all seen things like this happen. So yeah, you're not going to legislate this away. But going back to the laws that we're looking at, one that's real scary, and if you live in a state that has state preemption, you should absolutely be paying attention to see this when the anti-gun people come to your state. So state preemption is something we have in Washington, and basically what that means is the only people in Washington state allowed to make firearms-related laws are the state legislature. So when you get rid of state preemption, which is something they're trying to do, what that would do is it would allow every city and county and municipality to make their own firearms laws. So if you are in Washington state and you want to go from Spokane, which is 20 minutes from Idaho, on the east side of the state, and you want to drive the 4.5 hours to Seattle, while you're going on on the interstate, you're passing through multiple counties and cities along the way, and you would have to be responsible for knowing the laws in each and every city and county that you go to. I mean, heck, just my daily commute to work, I would go through 3 different jurisdictions, and I might be legal in one and illegal in 2, just having a concealed carry on me. How are you expected to keep yourself up to date and be knowledgeable of all of these things realistically? Like, it's an unrealistic expectation.
Especially with everything changing every single year. It's hard enough to figure out what the carrying laws are just going from state to state. Now, imagine doing it from city to city. Like, it would be...
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine... over here in this part of Washington, you can go from... In a 2-hour drive, you can go from Bremerton to Seattle, or Seattle to Everett, and you cross through a ton of area along the way. Even if you just live in the city of Seattle, there's so much like smaller like sub-cities that are incorporated into what people would consider Seattle, that you cross a block, now you're illegal. How does that... Imagine being a lawyer for that, like that. It would be impossible to keep track of, to be able to fight.
It wouldn't work.
No,
really wouldn't work.
It would just be so hard to do.
But they're purposely doing that, because then you go, wow, that's a headache. I don't want to do that. I'm not going to get my concealed carry. I'm just going to leave my gun at home. Yeah, exactly. The other thing that they're trying to do as well is to enforce a permit to purchase. So what this would be is, if you wanted to buy a gun, you would have to go through a training program. You would have to go through a state certified course. Who knows what that would look like or what it would be. Nope.
Pay a bunch of money to get a license to buy a gun, right? And this is something to me that's ridiculous. And people try to make the argument, oh, you have to have a license to drive a car. Yeah, but that's to drive the vehicle. I can go buy one.
Well, in the Bill of Rights, they clearly say you have the right to drive your Toyota. it just doesn't make sense to me. This is your right as an American. This was written from your forefathers because they knew one day that this would happen again. And it's happening again, and we're just getting cucked, and we're just taking it.
I'm kind of glad you brought up the forefathers thing. One thing I know I made a post about it, and I really wanted to talk more in detail about this before on this episode. So we came from a line of people in the United States that did a lot of really hard things, right? 1776, the country decides no more, and they stand up to the largest military power in the world. They said, we will not comply. And this was over a 3-cent tax on tea, right? And meanwhile,
There was a lot more.
we have tons of y'all out there that went from my cold dead hands, but the minute the ATF offered you a free tax stamp to turn your pistol into an SBR and give all of your information freely to the ATF, a bunch of y'all went, okay.
No.
Imagine if the Brits, if the people at Concord and Lexington, when the Brits showed up, when they said, yeah, come and, say, yeah, from my cold dead hands, and the Brits go, hey, lay down your arms, cease and desist, and they went, oh, well, this is too much. All right, what are you going to do? Walked off and went home. We'd all be having tea at 3 o'clock.
Dude, it's just literally ridiculous because I love the cold dead hands guys, especially the dudes that would come into the gun shop while we were working at, and on their shirt it'd be really big, will not comply, and as they're complying to every single gun law that's ever been made and pushed.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? You are the complying. Like, you are the group they're talking about when they say, like, oh yeah, those liberal F-tards or whatever, they're not the people buying guns. You are, and you're complying with every single thing that they just said.
And the thing is, too, for those who are on the left who are buying guns, they don't give a shit about the law.
Far from few in between.
They don't care about the law at all. They are willingly violating it, right? And they're just expecting your ability to be a good citizen to shut up and color and to do what you're told. The radical left, the way left, like the actual commies, not like the college kid who wears a Che Guevara shirt, but like the kid, like the dude who's actually a communist, like full-blown. Some of these guys, you can watch the Vice documentaries and about them and stuff that go off and fight with like the Peshmerga and stuff over in the Kurdistan. Some of these dudes, they're very pro-gun. They're not pro-gun by protecting it in the Bill of Rights. They're pro-gun because they want an armed revolution to, do commie things. But, they're not your friend.
Yeah. You can have guns if you're on my side.
And that's one thing, too, I kind of want to address is that I fully get the mentality behind just uniting all gun owners regardless of left, right, whatever. But we also need to be wary of that. There was a really good post I saw one time where it's this guy in tack gear getting the crap beat out of him. It's all hand-drawn, right? The guy's in tack gear getting crap beat out of him by an Antifa guy. And the guy getting the crap beat out of him is like, oh, but I fought for your Second Amendment rights. Like, they don't care. They just want They want guns to kill you and take your guns. They don't care about you keeping guns, right? Whereas most of us, like, we just want people to enjoy guns in general. So you got to be wary of who you're allying with, even if it is serving your purpose. Be wary of who your allies are. But one thing, too, I wanted to talk about with the whole do not comply thing. Especially, like, let's talk about the brace ban, for example, the elephant in the room. The government has just spent the last 2 years lying to you. It has been telling you, like, COVID thing, totally safe, all this jazz, like everything they've told us for like the last 2 years has been a lie. A lot of people who were kind of on the fence woke up in the last 2 years. And all of a sudden, you think the agency responsible for Waco, Ruby Ridge, and some of the grossest constitutional violations this country has ever seen is actually trying to help you? You think that they're going to willingly just be like, yeah, we'll miss out on billions of dollars of taxpayer revenue? Look at this, right? The Congress has charged the ATF and said you have to collect $200, period. Like, they legally can't waive that. Okay, so even if they work something out for this bill of amnesty,
they legally can't make laws either. But
100%.
Here we are.
But they are going to say, hey, yeah, so I know you filled out all that paperwork and everything, but turns out we need $200. And they could do this at any given time. And what are you going to do? Tell them no? They already know what you have, right? And let's say they already gave you the tax stamp. Well, great. They know exactly where your stuff is. You don't think that they're going to show up? And I'm not sure if you heard about this, Mike. I'm not sure if I talked to you about this yet. But there was did you see the thing about the 88-day rule that came out of SHOT Show? Yeah, so for those who don't know, there's apparently a rule where if your background check for an NFA item goes longer than 88 days,
it lapses.
It basically it lapses and goes into like a denial status, right? So whenever this guy at SHOT Show asked the ATF, pretending to be a lawyer, or he might have actually been a lawyer, and was saying, hey, I've got a client, they want to know what to do if this should happen. Well, the ATF lady says, well, we'll absolutely take enforcement action. So if your thing goes in an extended wait time, which if 40 million of you are trying to do this, when they normally handle 2.5 million a year, it's going to be that way. Guess who's getting a knock on the door from the ATF? Like, when has it ever in any context been a good idea to send law enforcement evidence of something that you own that is now considered illegal? When has that ever been a good thing? Like you see the posts where it's like, hey, bring your crack down to the police department and we'll test it if it's gluten-free. Like, these are phishing traps designed for idiots. You don't think that that's what this is? Like pull your head out, man.
Yeah. Show us your illegal firearm.
I mean, yeah, exactly. And the way the process generally works, right, when you do an NFA form, you fill the paperwork out, you get approval first, then you put it together. You can't have it in possession beforehand. Well, now, we're just supposed to assume the ATF is totally cool with you having an illegal SBR, the way that they've said it, by their definition, that you have an illegal SBR, they're just going to let you keep it? Or, better yet, what happens when they come back and they go, denied? Like, normally, if they deny it, right, that just means you don't build it. Well, now you're in possession of it. So what do you think's going to happen? Probably going to get a letter or a visit something along the lines of, yeah, so you're going to destroy it or we're going to take you to jail.
Yeah. And then a lot of people are like, well, I don't post it online and this and this. Well, sorry to break it to you, 4473s are kept on record for a long time. And if you bought that pistol in a pistol configuration, they now have record of you buying an NFA item.
And if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong, I think when we worked at the shop itself has to keep it physically on hand for 5 years, and then store it for like 30 and then store it for 20. Yeah. Right. And in ATF audits 4473s at gun shops all the time. They shops that have electronic 4473s. The ATF has been caught trying to make a database in its own system of the 4473s it's collected. It's pretty easy for them to figure out. On top of that, okay, even if you've never posted a picture of a gun you filled out online, everything you ever bought was a 3D printed receiver or bought it from Joe in the back of a truck, whatever, right? You don't think that when they go, hey, your ATM card's been charged with like buying a buttload of magazines and 5.56 over the last 15 years, you don't think they're going to put two and two together? Like, look, I'm not trying to dissuade people, right? But I'm just saying, like, be smart. Use your head.
Yeah.
Right? Don't think you're just in the clear.
At some point, you have to draw your line in the sand, and that's where we're going to talk about something that's not legal advice.
Yeah, the following, we are not advocating for anything. We are not responsible for anything. If you do something stupid, that's on you. However,
not stupid. Yeah, but if you do something crazy,
well, I'm making a disclaimer here. This is not legal advice. But what I am saying is, if you have the idea of non-compliance when it comes to a form of a law, civil disobedience is absolutely a thing, and it is very effective. It's got a lot of people their civil rights, right? However, there are consequences to civil disobedience. That's why it's called civil disobedience. You don't get to just be disobedient and get away free. Some people do. If you do it in large numbers, we've seen that be effective in the past, right? Because they can't get everybody.
Yeah, like burning down, apartments or burning down stores and rioting and doing whatever you want, you won't get in trouble at all.
Exactly. But you got to keep in mind there are consequences. So everyone has to draw their line in the sand, right? And everyone has a line in the sand for something they believe in that they are willing to risk everything for. But what I mean by this is if you're someone who has, an item that is affected by this new NFA piece of garbage from the ATF, and you decide, I'm just not going to comply. I'm not telling you not to do that. What I'm saying is understand what that means and the consequences that come with it should you choose to exercise that as an option, right? So again, I'm not trying to dissuade people from doing what they think is right and where their heart is at. But understand that you might have to make a very hard choice, very realistically, and that this is not a game, this is not a meme, and that this is real life, and it comes with big boy consequences, right? And if you're mentally and emotionally prepared for that, physically, yeah, and you've got that mindset to do that, whatever you believe in, you're willing to risk everything for. I just want people to have a realistic expectation of what that actually looks like and what that means, right? And not to jump into something just because it's a cool internet trend, right? And be like, oh, I'm gonna do this, blah blah blah, and then you get a knock on your door and you're like, oh, never mind. And if you're not that guy and you're gonna, you get a knock on the door and you decide today's the day, not for me, that is your choice. But you have to make that. You have to make that choice, and you have to be prepared for the consequences that come with it. Again, I'm not advocating anything. I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm telling you to think about, search your heart and figure out, what.
What are you willing to die for, essentially?
Exactly. Like every one of us, whether it be family, a political ideology, a religion, whatever, we all have something that, if a line were to be crossed against that you would do anything and give up anything. Like, for a lot of people, it's, your wife, your kids, if someone were to try to harm them, you don't care what it is that you have to do. You're going to keep them safe, and that's your line in the sand. For some of us, it's political ideologies, religion, certain things. There are things that you and everyone has that we believe in, that we say if something happens, if whatever event I have in my head, that is my line. That's where I say no more.
This could be the event.
Yeah, and that could be it. And, going back to like Lexington and Concord, 83, I think it was, 83, 84 men stood together and said, this is it. A lot of people don't realize, and they don't remember, the battles of Lexington and Concord, when the British were coming out to challenge the Minutemen, the whole reason they were coming was because they knew that these people had formed militias and they were coming to confiscate their powder and their shot. They were coming for their arms and ammunition, to confiscate them. The military at this time was the police force. The military and police were coming to take away their guns. And the people stood together, shoulder to shoulder, in a small community, vastly outnumbered, vastly outgunned, and they had a cause that they were willing to, and many of them did die for. And they stood their ground, they said no more, and they said, this will be where we put our line in the sand. And I'm not advocating that you be that guy. I'm not telling you that you need to be that guy. But I am saying that if that is your mentality, you need to honestly do some soul searching and make sure that is where, that you're making that choice for the right reasons. Like I have things I will gladly die for. I have things and ideologies and family, things that if that's how I go out, so be it, right? And I have other things that aren't worth it. I'm not going to tell you what those are because that's everyone's own personal decision, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's some things where you're like, some people would say, and don't be surprised, if it comes down to that, I guarantee you there are people listening, or people out there that will go, well, I'd never do that. I wouldn't give up my guns, never. I'll face him at the door, I'll take him at the doorstep. And
they're the first one applying for a free tax stamp.
Exactly. They're the ones out here paying $200. Oh, I was going to register my SBR anyway. Or they're throwing on they see some guys out there with blazers with 3 letters on the back, whatever agency shows up, and they're going, you know what, on second thought, I'm not that guy,
Yeah. I
right?
mean, a more recent event that we can bring up is the one that happened in Texas. I don't know exact numbers. I'll Google it later and I can post it or somewhere. Those guys in Texas that went down and took over a government building with their guns because they kept on.
Oh, I didn't hear about this.
Yeah, so there was a water line going through and they were basically taking farmers' land
Mm-hmm.
without their consent. They're like, hey, we're taking this land no matter what. You have no say in it. And what they did was they went down, they took over a government building, they held it at arms. No one was shot, no one was killed. I don't believe there were a few shots fired, but nobody was killed. But what happened was is they ended up giving the land back to those farmers and saying, all right, this is what we're calling it.
That kind of reminds me of. Do you remember the Oregon standoff a few years back, like 2014,
Not super
with the Bundy brothers?
Not super well, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, so I mean, I remember. So I was active duty at the time, right? And this was taken down in Oregon, and it wasn't that far from where I was stationed. And I remember watching it daily on the news because I remember watching it originally, actually before that, even with when it was the Bundy Ranch in Nevada. This was, I think that was 2014, and what it was that that was when the BLM got involved with those ranchers and were trying to take their land. If you're not familiar, there was a place in Nevada, and if I remember right, the backstory was something along the lines of this guy's family had owned the land for like 150 years. They were trying to say there's some kind of rare tortoise, desert tortoise on your land, and we got to take all your stuff to clear this land out and make it a preserve. And they were like, no, we're not going to sell you the land. This is our land. And they kept trying to pressure them, and they were trying to get the state to do it. And then eventually they were like, well, we found from years and years and years and years ago that somebody didn't pay tax on something. It's 150 years later, so cough up a ton of money. And then the government came in and like started killing their cattle and taking their stuff. And people were showing up in droves. Armed Americans from everywhere showed up, and it was a standoff between them and the feds, and they backed off. And then later, I think I want to say it was 20, I think that one might have been 2012, 2013, and this was 2014, 2015. I'm getting the years kind of mixed up. Those same guys that were involved in that standoff, they went to Oregon, and I don't remember exactly the context as to why, but basically they took over a wildlife preserve building. No one was in it, and they set up shop, and they said, we'll leave when you release these two guys from prison that were wrong. I think it was what it had been is these two guys had started a fire as like a back burn, and it had spread onto some federal land, and that they were being charged with arson, even though it was like a total accident thing, but the government actually had been trying to get these people's land for a long time. So one, it took the land, yeah, threw them in jail, and they were requesting that those people get let out. And so when I say people that are willing to die for things, I know this guy's pretty much seen as a martyr in the pro-2A and pro-liberty movement, but if there's Lavoy Finicum was a cowboy who came down there, mm-hmm, and was with the Bundys and everything, and the FBI tried to make a move on the basically what happened was, they had this standoff and they had this thing set up there for like a while, it was a couple months, and it got to a point to where, if I remember right, there was people in this facility, some 3%er groups from all over kind of came out and they didn't want this to turn into like a Waco. So they made a perimeter around it, and they wouldn't let those guys out, and they wouldn't let the FBI in. And they were like, we're here to play middleman to make sure nothing happens. Well, if I remember right, I think like the sheriff had offered to talk to Lavoy Finicum or something, was basically being like, hey, we'll give you free passage from here to the state border, just leave. And they were getting ready to take it, and the FBI made a move on them, fired rounds into the vehicle, killed Lavoy Finicum, right? And that was a guy who, he knew when to put your boots on, and he knew when to stand up for what he believed in, and he did. There's tons of recent examples. There's all kinds of different examples you can look at, but again, it all comes down to kind of wrap things up. And again, this is a little bit different episode, and we'll go back to our normal, fun stuff.
Mm-hmm. More somber, like,
yeah,
serious one.
So this kind of sum things up. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Right? Have situational awareness of the political environment that you live in. Know what rights and rules are being challenged. Fight those in the courtroom so you don't have to fight them in the streets. The other side of that, spend some time to do some soul searching and to know where your allegiances lie what they lie to, and to what your allegiances lie to, and what is that one thing? What is the thing to you that is going to be?
What's the straw?
Yeah, what's the straw that breaks the camel's back? Because if you keep pushing that line down the road and keep kicking that can, you're just going to get to a point to where you can't have everything. There's a saying where it was like, I think they refer to, I think it was in reference to like the Holocaust, and they were saying like, first they came for the Jews and I said nothing, then they came for the gypsies and I said nothing, and then they came for the communists and I said nothing, and because I said nothing, there was no one to speak up when they came for me, right? And don't be that guy. Don't be the one that doesn't do anything, right? That just sits there and lets other people fight your battles, because then there will be nothing left to fight for you, and there will be nothing left to fight for. Yeah. And you will be a person living in an idealistic past. And one more thing too, personal pet peeve of mine. If you live in Washington State, if you run an Instagram, social media of any type, YouTube, whatever, and you're pro-2A, you're pro-gun, and you are not actively involved in fighting the legislation in some way, at the minimum, spreading a word, making a comment about it, doing something to get people motivated out there and active. If you were just one of these guys that goes, don't know, don't care, doesn't matter, I got mine, screw them, I don't let the government run my life, I understand that mentality. But if your inaction helps further their action to take our guns away, and these laws go through, in my eyes, you are just as personally responsible for the passing of this legislation as they are. Because it's just like that saying, all it takes is for evil to succeed is good men to do nothing.
Yep. And like I said, not legal advice at all, but we're doing this training for a reason.
Right. Whatever, because everyone has a doomsday scenario in their head somewhere, right? They all have a reason why we prep. We all have a reason why we own firearms.
Maybe it's not the Russians invading and it's home turf.
Again, this is not legal advice. We're not advocating anything. Do not commit any violent acts. If you do, you are an idiot. I'm saying that as a disclaimer. Do not go out and do something and say, I heard this on the Mid-Tier podcast, Mid-Tier Thoughts podcast, and they advocated for it. That's why I did it. Just like Risky Krisky does in his videos, I am throwing this out as a disclaimer. So I am not legally liable for anything that you do that might be considered stupid. Just remember, if one person does it, they're usually an idiot. If everyone does it, it's usually the right thing. But yeah, again, this has been kind of a rant episode for us. We kind of been talking about this a little bit. We were kind of hesitant to do this as an episode, but we really wanted to get these thoughts out there, get people motivated, especially to our Washington listeners. If you're out there, get involved in the fight. Hit us up on Instagram if you don't know what's going on or you don't know how to do something. Contact the Firearms Policy Coalition, Second Amendment Foundation, Gun Owners of America.
Not the NRA.
Yeah, the NRA is useless, but they'll at least point you in the right direction. They have updates they have updates as far as what the bills are called and the numbers if you want to look them up and read them. Other than that, guys, like I said, we're going to get back to our normal fun, kind of more goofball content that we normally do next week. This episode's been a little late as I'm doing some Navy Reserve stuff this week. Mike's been gracious enough to stay awake long enough to let us record tonight, so we're going to go ahead and call it. But yeah, thanks for listening, guys. Again, this is Mid-Tier Thoughts.
Yeah.
Good to have you.
See you next week.